Welcome to the Nutshell lectures, where we explain complex areas of the EU's recovery and resilience policies in short lectures of a few minutes. In this first lecture, we will explain how the next generation EU is being funded. To explain to you how the present mechanism to finance the next generation EU has been created, I will use 3 points and in 6 minutes. The first point will just to present how member states get into a debt crisis and therefore what kind of responses needed, which leads to the second point is how the EU created a borrowing and lending mechanism to support member states facing a debt crisis. And this leads directly to the mechanisms for the next generation EU, which is an adaptation of this borrowing and lending mechanism by adding a system to also finance the grants for the next generation EU. Okay, let's start. As we know, when there is a crisis in a member state, one of the main problems is that we will see, due to their expenditures, that their debt levels increase, and therefore, as a consequence, the credit rating goes down. So, for these member states, then, the borrowing on the financial markets becomes more complicated as the borrowing costs increased. The interest rates gone up for the borrowing costs. This leads to debt unsustainability, and therefore the countries face a problem when they get into such a situation. Luckily for member states of the EU, we have a solution, which is that the EU is in the middle. Now the member states has some options. Due to the financial crisis, the EU created a borrowing and lending mechanism for member states, which the member states could borrow money from the financial markets using the high credit rating of the European Commission as a solution to the high interest rates that they would face if they did it. So the member state requests a loan from the European Commission. A loan which, of course, the European Commission has to approve and has to be in line with other obligations of the country. For that, the European Commission will sell bonds to the financial markets and therefore borrow money, which will then be transferred as a loan to the member states. So the European Commission operates as an intermediary. The terms of the money borrowed are directly transferred to the loans. The member states face the same conditions that the European Commission managed to negotiate. Now, what happens with the repayment? The member states has to repay the loan directly to the European Commission. This funding will then be transited and used to repay to the financial markets when these bonds have reached their maturity. This money transits off budget is not part of the EU budget because it's not for expenditures of the EU budget, but for the member states. What happens if there is a default? A default will immediately trigger an EU budget guarantee. This is what makes the EU so important for these countries, is that the EU budget has a very high credit rating. Therefore, financial markets will be paid for it. The guarantee is backed by the member states' contribution based on their GNI share. So once the EU has used all of the reserves that they have, funding, if there is more money needed, we'll need to ask the member states for a GNI contribution to cover up this additional expenditure. But attention, the member states that is defaulting still remains liable for paying back. So it's not that the member states have to pay and that's it. The money will be reimbursed by the defaulting member states. But now let's see what happens with the next generation EU. Well, the system is very similar to the one of borrowing and lending for the member states' expenditures, but there is a fundamental difference, and this is the grants inside the EU budget has to be also financed by borrowing from the markets. So how does it work? First of all, the member states are asking for money that has been agreed on the next generation for the next generation EU, and will ask for loans and grants through their national recovery and resilience plans, but also for some of the additional programs that the next generation EU has. This goes to the European Commission. The European Commission sells bonds, now again for loans and grants, not only loans. The loans will then go directly to the member states. So the money borrowed for loans crosses the European Commission. But there is now an additional level above, which is the one of the funding for the grants. Some of the funding has to go up to pay the grants. So the EU budget will be financed by this borrowed money too, for grants that will be then distributed to the member states according to the programs that they have. For the loans, the reimbursements will work exactly the same as with the normal lending and borrowing mechanism. For the grants, however, it is the own resources of the general budget of the EU budget that will cover all the operations, including the grants for Next Generation EU. The member states pay the contributions to the own resources with their GNI share and also VAT-based own resource. Then you have some other external resources that are own resources to the EU, like the existing border tariffs on the one hand, but you have new resources coming in. One is the plastic levy for non-recycled plastic. And then we have also some contributions from the European emissions trading system and a new carbon adjustment mechanisms to tax the emissions from importing countries. Of course, the EU budget operates as a guarantor for the loan. So if there is a default, the EU budget will be triggered as a guarantee. The money will be repaid to the financial markets, but the member states that has defaulted will still be liable to repay this money in the future. Of course, it is important to highlight that the repayment of the bonds is spread over many years until 2058. This ends the presentation of today on how to finance the Next Generation EU. For more information, more detailed information, you can find it in the publication for the European Parliament that we have prepared. You can find it in the CEP's publication website, but you can also download it from the European Parliament itself. In addition, I would like to point out to this publication, the Microeconomics of Debt, that can explain more. The first part really is how do you get into debt crisis and how to solve it, and the different mechanisms and relationships between different variables. A very interesting publication. Otherwise, for more information on the Next Generation EU, and particularly the Recovery and Resilience Facility, please visit the RRF Monitor specialized website from CEP. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and that you will be there too for the next Nutshell lectures. The next stage in the Nutshell lecture will be about the governance of the EU budget and the Next Generation EU. This is also part of the discussion in this publication, but we'll explain it again in very few minutes in the next Nutshell lecture. Goodbye.